My name is Blessed Sogah, and tonight on Top Story, we're looking at the final countdown to the domestic debt exchange deadline in just 4 days. And tonight, government has locked down another agreement, the third of its kind this time, with the Securities Industry Association. The Ghana Association of Banks was the first to okay amendments to its initial terms on the exchange program. Then it was followed by the Ghana Insurers Association. Well, we do know now that the three institutional bondholders will now receive a 5% coupon payment in 2023 and subsequently 9% for the 12 new bonds that will be issued. There's also a bit of a clarity now on how to assess the stabilization fund designed to prevent the collapse of heavily exposed financial institutions. And we also do understand the government is likely to propose some new terms for individuals with investments in collective schemes and mutual funds. But there is still no certainty now as to whether or not the finance minister will agree to exempt the elephant in the room, the individual bondholders. And that's why I want to bring in my colleague George Wiafe, who's been working on this, listening to sources and industry players as we walk through this journey. George, just 4 days away, technically less than four, as some are describing it. But walk us through the details of this agreement, the latest one that we're hearing of with the Securities Industry Association.
So earlier on, we were picking up some information from the meeting. What we understand now is that a deal has been reached. There is an official statement issued by the Ministry of Finance and the Ghana Securities Industry Association. And I'll try and go through the details. It says the government of Ghana and the Ghana Securities Industry Association have reached an agreement on the terms for participation by the capital market operators in the domestic debt exchange program. Now, these are the details. Now, that is extending the improved terms of the domestic debt exchange program agreed with the banks to all the Ghana securities industry members. So it appears that with respect to what has been finalized for the commercial banks in terms of paying 5% on the bonds that you're holding as in coupon payments and 9% on the 12 new bonds that will be issued, that will be the same thing for those who are in the capital market space. Also, another detail that says here that collective investment schemes and individuals who hold bonds in trust accounts and also Securities and Exchange Commission approved firms would be offered an enhanced commercial terms agreed or exemptions granted to the individual bondholders. Now, if you go through this line, it gives you that sense that something is on the table for the individual bondholders. We understand that they're in some meetings and something should be coming out very soon. So it appears that there will be something on the table that government will propose to these individual bondholders. The SIS also talks about the fact that government commits to providing support for the members impacted by this debt exchange program via a liquidity and solvency window that is through the Ghana Financial Stability Fund.
And we need to be clear on that fund because it was announced as part of the measures by the finance minister.
And
to address what problem specifically?
Basically, that these operators in this space can fall on this fund. Be it capital requirement, be it them having challenges in terms of meeting their obligations to their policyholders, they can fall on this fund. Now, listen, one thing that delayed some of these players from signing on to when the deadline, the second one elapsed, was that they wanted clarity on this fund
on how
and
to
how
assess
they can assess it. So now it appears that from the banks, from the insurance firms, they have some clarity on how this fund would be structured and how they can access it. And that is why you've had their president, that is Winston Nelson, actually appending the signature
to that very statement. We'll be getting to hear their side of the story shortly, but I do recall your conversation with the finance minister. He told you about the target he was working with this domestic debt exchange program, working with the threshold of 80% at least to secure the IMF austerity plan. Looking at the latest deal that government has secured now, that puts us way above 60%.
Well, I have not done the computation yet, but
looking at how much they control in the market.
If you do an intelligent guess, it could be that we are reaching that 80% target. So you don't know what is going to happen to still the individual bondholders, whether government will indeed exempt them or rather come up with some terms for those who are above 60, and because if you go through this line that says that whatever deal that they will offer these those who are in the collective investment schemes and all the rest will be similar to what they'll put on the table for individual bondholders. So if anything is to go by, it means that they might not be totally exempted from this domestic debt exchange program. They will still be on board. If you want to read meanings into this line in the statement that's jointly issued by the Finance Ministry and the Ghana Securities Industry Association, it appears that they might not be exempted.
But this, we need to be, stressing that point, that this is not what the individual bondholders are on the lookout for. They are on the lookout for total exemption.
Yeah, but I understand that there are some meetings going on between them and the Finance Minister, so we'll see what happens at the end of the day, whether they'll be exempted or not.
Okay, that's happening now, and of course we'll get a sense shortly of what the fallouts will be. George Weafe there with the Joy Business team giving us the latest update. He'll be back if indeed we have that, of course, outlined by the Finance Minister before the end of this program. But I want to bring in now Winston Nelson Jr., he's president of the Securities Association, joining us on the telephone lines. Now, thank you, sir, for your time here on Top Story. So the terms laid out clearly for you. I'm just wondering what convinced you, first of all, for you to sign on to this new agreement.
Thank you, and a very good evening to you, Ivan. I think that from our last conversation, we said that we were not convinced with the commercial terms that were on the table. Commercial terms being the returns that were being proposed on the coupon payments over the period. And then the second point that we were concerned about was how the collective investment schemes were going to be treated vis-a-vis the individual bondholders. So these were the discussions that we've had with the ministry over the past week to bring clarity to. In terms of the commercial terms, as you know, and as was in the bank's release, you could see that some changes have been done to it. And we have all come to the conclusion that given the circumstances we find ourselves under, this would be the best commercial terms that the government is able to offer us, and therefore we are willing to proceed in the interest of making sure the market's open, and then we can all go about getting the financial sector wheels churning again. Then the second key point was that government has agreed that whatever treatment it gives to individual bondholders, it will be extended to collective investment schemes. Because of the nature of collective investment schemes, it was a very important point for us. Because most people who put their funds in investment into collective investment schemes are actually not even the middle class. They are the ones below the middle class. So we had to make sure that we acted to protect them. So once these two key things were resolved, we felt that we were in a position to start getting to an understanding with government, subject to they bringing the amended exchange memorandum, and then we can proceed from there.
And that's why I want a bit of clarity on the conversation surrounding the extension of the same cases or, of course, respite that's been extended to you and the banks to individual bondholders. Is it your expectation? What did you negotiate for? Is it your expectation that government will communicate to these individual bondholders that they need to sign on to the debt exchange program? What went into that clause for which we are seeing that firmly on the statement that you've signed?
So unfortunately, we are not in the negotiations that government is having with individual bondholders. But if you could, from our previous press releases, you can see that we were clear that it would not be progressive if individual bondholders are treated in a certain way which is different from individuals holding investment in collective schemes. They must be treated as the same block. So our statement is clear. Whether you are exempting them, then make sure you extend it. If you are giving them any different deal, then make sure that that same deal goes to individuals. And once government agrees to fair and equal treatment, we were happy to proceed. Remember that the Individual Bondholders Forum, in their statement, they also took the same position about collective schemes and then individuals being treated at par.
The question is, what would you lose as industry players if individual bondholders are not affected or are exempt from the domestic debt exchange? I'm asking this question precisely because of the amount that you control. Over 60% or 80% of that threshold that the finance minister is looking for. We in fact have a surplus of 9%. So we can simply do away with the individual bondholders. Why is it so crucial to you as industry players to have individual bondholders on?
Look, I think that for us, I want to clarify our position once again. Ours is not against exemption, or it's about treatment, fair treatment of individuals and collective schemes, which is the same position that the Individual Bondholders Forum had. The key thing here is that a deal is being made. There's a crisis, there's a restructuring happening, and a deal is being made to different types of bondholders. So each one views this deal through different lenses. So for us, it was key to look at our constituency, those who were with us, and be able to see what are your key concerns. Can you do with this deal, etc. So that is the angle with which we approached government and said that government, let's look at this. Can you do better for individuals as against to the domestic institutional bondholders? If you can do better, then please just extend that one to all the individuals that are in collective scheme, because that is very important and critical to us.
And just one final question on what's going to happen if indeed we have the finance minister exempt individual bondholders. The government of Ghana has not varied its communication around how voluntary this debt exchange program is, which means that what you have signed now is an agreement in principle. You may opt out if the conditions precedent are not met. Are we likely to see you walk out of that agreement if the finance minister today, or say over the weekend, make that announcement to exempt individual bondholders?
No, from the statement, that is not our position. Our position is that there must be parity of treatment. So if individual bondholders are exempt, we expect that CISs will also be exempt. That is the agreement we have come to with the minister. And of course, if that changes, then the understanding we have has changed. But if that is held, I don't see us walking out of this agreement at any point.
Yeah, exactly why I'm asking the question. What will happen? I'm just wondering.
What will happen? So you're asking what will happen if individuals are exempt but CISs are not exempt? In that case, then the understanding has changed. So we cannot proceed as is.
Anyway, we await what the outcome will be. But for now, I'm hoping that you are also going to count on the stabilization fund and how your members will be able to assess it if they become exposed as a result of this debt exchange program. Have you been explained to? Do you feel that that fund is sufficient to help you on that course?
Well, absolutely. We've had discussions on the fund. It was part of the agreement we reached. If you look on our statements, we had about 4 points there. Those were important and critical to us, that the agreement that the minister signed to us, these things were captured in there. So, yes, the fund has been explained to us. We know that it will be managed by the Financial Stability Council. We had urged that there is an independent manager that would manage this fund, and we've been assured that capital markets will have access to these funds. So at any point in time, if any of our members are having a crisis, we know that we would have access to it. We are also of the understanding that the Securities and Exchange Commission is going to draft the processes that will guide capital markets on how to access this fund. So those are all the things that details that we agreed that convinced us to lean towards getting this DDE done.
Well, I'm grateful for your time. That's Winston Nelson Jr., who's president of the Securities Association. Well, speaking about individual bondholders, there have been weeks of engagement with government's technical team. Both sides have presented their cases, and they're hoping that Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta will make that crucial announcement soon. One of their leaders and legal counsel, Martin People, is pushing for total exemption, contrary to what the industry players have agreed to with the Finance Minister. Take a listen to Martin People when I was engaging with him earlier today on The Pulse.
We will not compromise. And also, you see, that suggestion for now, for lack of a better word, let's say it looks odd. I'm trying to choose a very diplomatic word. It will look odd because, Mr. Sogah, so why would the Finance Minister send us into a technical committee meeting to go suggest ways of cutting expenditure, only for him to come back and offer 5%? Yes, 100% exemption or nothing else. And I believe, hopefully, we should make it. We should make it because it would be, as I said, very odd that he would have set up a committee to look at how to cut expenditure and raise revenue and then come up with 5%. Because, Mr. Sogah, if he was to come up with 5%, then it means that we are going to open another round of negotiations. And so it means that what we would have done or what we did at the committee would have been useless. So it doesn't add up. You see the context. Then it means that we're just sent to the committee on a wild goose chase. That's not how things are done. So because of that, I don't want to believe that we'll be offered 5% or 10% or any other percentage for this year. Right. It's easier to cut expenditure than to raise revenue. So the expenditure cuts we propose, there are a number of them. Let me run through the big ticket items. Number one, you will see that we are going to spend over 5 billion on capital expenditure. That's the local component, which is not oil revenue. So let's explain this way. When you go to the capital expenditure of 27 billion, about 16 billion of it is coming from foreign sources. Foreign sources, they are not donor funds. It's not for free. So from foreign sources, 16 billion of it. Then the remainder of it, some other billions are from the oil revenue that we get. The law says we should use the oil revenue, part of it, for capital expenditure. Then apart from that, there's a third item, which is non-oil revenue, which will be used for capital expenditure. That one is 5-point-something billion. So we ask that one be cut in half by 50%. So minimum, you are getting about 2.7 billion there. When you look in the budget, we intend to spend about 23 billion paying some debts in the energy sector. Yes, you heard me, 23 billion. The energy shortfalls, right? So we are going to pay some debts there. So we think that government can renegotiate so that we'll make some savings there. Don't pay all the 23 billion within 1 year. Minimum, we'll make about 5 billion there.
The point about the meeting that's happening in a few hours, I guess, from now with the Finance Minister. What will happen if the Finance Minister gives less of your expectation?
Mr. Sogah, our instructions are to reject same. Yes, very firm instructions. What we put on the table, which the Finance Minister appeared to have accepted, and for which reason he set up the committee, was that we want 100% exemption.
And that's one of the leading figures of the individual bondholders and legal counsel lawyer Martin People telling us what clear instructions has received from his clients on this matter of the domestic debt exchange with regard to the individual bondholders. But a lot has been unfolding tonight. I want to first of all bring in economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Godfred Bokwin. Thanks, Prof, and welcome to Top Story.
Good evening, Evans, and good evening to your cherished listeners.
Blessed here. But Prof, I first of all want you to listen to some of the reactions that have been greeting this decision by government, including the former President John Mahama himself. He's waded into the conversations about running possibly a lean government in such a time, a crucial time where we are facing an economic crisis. While delivering a lecture at the United Kingdom-based think tank Chatham House, he's accused government of showing little attention to cutting down on expenditure in such a period of severe economic crisis. I want you to listen to him, then we explore the alternatives on this debt exchange program.
And after you've recklessly mismanaged the economy, you don't want to make the same sacrifices. You're asking the people to make all the sacrifices. Sacrifice your bond, I'll pay you in 15 years. How do you know the person will live till 15 years? And yet, correspondingly, government expenditure is increasing. One would have thought that in this crisis, you're not going to increase your debt in this budget by 82 billion over last year. 2023 budget has seen government expenditure increase by 82 billion over 2022. That is not a government that is serious about making the same sacrifices it is asking the people to do. And that is our concern with this debt restructuring program. Apart from that,
well, John Mahama there in the United Kingdom. It makes sense to you, Professor Bobkin?
It does. I think the crisis is pushing even the opposition to make commitments that, assuming they come to power, we can hold them to, which is good. And I think that a lot has been shared on the fact that there's considerable room for expenditure-based fiscal consolidation. What the technical committee, together with the individual bondholders forum, has done is to actually quantify that. That should help us to clarify some doubts about the fact that the fiscal side isn't doing sufficient to restoring debt sustainability. Typically, when your debt is considered unsustainable, we talk about a triangle. There are three legs that you can use. You have fiscal adjustment, structural adjustment, and then debt restructuring. Now, if you look at where our debt to GDP ratio is in present value terms, more than 100%. If you want to reduce it to, let's say, 55% threshold, as the IMF has recommended, by 2028, in the next 5 years, then we are looking at a primary surplus of not less than 12%. And that is very huge. And that is why we are saying that we cannot record that primary surplus through the budget alone. But the budget must deliver a considerable primary surplus in order to ease the burden on the other options available in the form of structural adjustment and then debt restructuring. And yet, in the 2023 budget, the fiscal side is only delivering 0.7% of GDP. And that is why the focus is excessively on debt restructuring, while the structural reform, actually, we have zero assigned to that now. So the point that we are making is that there is room to cut expenditure without hurting growth. The earlier we listen to that call, the better for all of us. We cannot, even if government achieves, let's say, 70% or 80% and celebrate that, we cannot celebrate that as a country. You cannot celebrate impoverishing your people, taking their bonds. You cannot celebrate weakening the financial sector in the name of restoring the public sector balance sheet. Okay, so government, and remember that this is a long journey. So it is important that government considers the proposal of the committee so it doesn't seem to be a waste of time and take certain practical steps to cut expenditure and downsize, right, the government and make some fiscal savings that will ease the burden on creditors. That said, you also see that the pushback that we witness from banks, securities, and the rest of them actually yielded some results, even though they have signed. You will see that the December 5th proposal systematically weakens the financial sector much more than the revision we saw with the second amended and then the third amended. So if you look at the final terms that the banks have signed into, you are looking at some losses in the range of maybe up to 40%, right, which is much lower than the 80% and more that we saw under the first proposal.
But that may be the advantage accruing to industry players, say the banks, the securities industry as well. But for the individual bondholders, the future remains unclear. There's this clause in the agreement that has been reached.
For the sake of confidence in the financial sector, I think it makes a lot more sense for government to just exclude the individual bondholders.
I get that, but I'm asking this question, and of course you appreciate that when I paint that picture to you. The concerns about fair play here. The industry, on one hand, is asking for the extension of similar conditions and terms of the debt exchange to individual bondholders. Invariably, they're asking for no exemption, technically, for the individual bondholders.
No,
how do you expect that government will deal with this?
They have a better cushion, okay, and shock absorbers than individuals. Okay, so it is possible to have some level of differentiation in there, even though when we talk about fairness within creditor type, there is enough theoretical grounding for that. But the greater fairness and equity that we should ask for should be where the bulk of the burden is actually taken by the fiscal side, because the source of Ghana's problem is largely fiscal. So if fiscal is the main source of the problem, then the fiscal must contribute a bit more to addressing the problem rather than loading it on creditors.
So what's the future looking like now? Government will smoothly sail through with the IMF? Is that your projection?
I think that government has made significant progress. That is not so strange, given that all those who have signed up now probably would have come under some form of regulatory coercion. And you could see that from day one. And we are a bit disappointed in terms of the regulators. They might have failed in protecting the subsectors that they regulate, because from day one, Bank of Ghana decided to risk weight the old bonds differently from the new one. That already tells you the position they have taken, right? So good news, but to the extent that they don't have a similar leverage over individual bondholders, yes, that may be a bit challenging for them. But the other thing that we could ask for is that it is possible for government overall to revise the terms in such a way that they can get almost 100% participation. Then in that case, you get everybody on board. But it is also possible that individual bondholders can also leverage this situation to ask for greater fiscal and governance reforms in a manner that ensures sustainability, rather than saying that let's ask for exclusion, because their inclusion could actually lead to greater governance and fiscal reforms, which would actually inure to the benefit of the economy as a whole for the foreseeable future. So we have a trade-off here that we have to manage. We either say we don't want to be part, exclude us, or we want to be part under a certain revised terms, but that also gives us leverage to make certain reforms. And the reforms can only come from individual bondholders. It will not come strongly from banks and the other non-bank financial institutions, because the pushback will just be that focus on your business. But I think that individual bondholders can ask for greater fiscal reform and governance reforms. That is what we need now. Ghana's problem is largely governance, and that manifests explicitly in economic mismanagement.
Right.
So we have to look at governance reforms, back that with the necessary productivity reforms, product market reforms, industry-specific reforms that would ensure that whatever gains we make from the IMF program, we'll be able to situate them within the context of durability.
And I'm grateful for sharing those perspectives with us, economist and professor of finance at the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Godfred Popkin, alarmed about the mismanagement of the economy. Well, for former President John Dramani Mahama, he believes that some persons must be paying the price for that, including the finance minister himself, Ken Ofori-Atta, who is asking that President Akufo-Addo must consider sacking from office.
You don't let the driver who ran you into a ditch, after you've managed to pull the car out of the ditch, see him sit behind the wheel again. And, I mean, the majority itself, members of the MPP, have said, take this finance minister out. Bring somebody who the public will have more faith in. And because he didn't create the crisis, they will be better able to have a negotiation, sit down with this person and negotiate in good faith. But the one who's caused the problem is the one you're asking to negotiate with bondholders for a debt restructuring. So that is our concern with the debt restructuring. Of course, government has applied for debt relief under the G20 debt treatment. We had thought that they would take advantage of the DSSI at the time it was announced, but because they did not want to be shut out from the international capital market, wanted to continue borrowing, they refused to access the DSSI. And that is what has led, now the international capital market is shut to you anyway. If you had undertaken the DSSI, it would have suspended your debt service and given you fiscal space. Probably would have been able to maneuver out of the situation in which we are. But they refused, and the same result that you were trying to avoid, being shut out of the market, has happened. You've been downgraded to junk status. Ghana's credit is at junk status on the garbage heap. Nobody is going to lend you money. And so unless we get the benevolence of the IMF to shore up our reserves with the 3 billion loan and hold the headmaster's stick over us to let people know that we're behaving ourselves properly in school, then our economy is in tatters. And so that's the problem. What we would have done differently, I would have not borrowed as
well, so that's John Dramani Mahama speaking in the United Kingdom's think tank. That's Chatham House, wrapping up a top story here on Joy 99.7 FM. It's time now for